Hey, welcome back to another Touchdesigner tutorial. Today we're going to be looking at doing instancing and using images from your own computer or videos if you'd like to render each little point of the instance. Just like every Touchdesigner tutorial I do, this will be more beginner centric and focused, and I'm going to try go through it slowly bit by bit. This project file is also available for download as is on my Patreon, which is linked below, just a few bucks a month to sign up, and it will also come with this quick little interlinked section here, which could make this whole process audio reactive. We're not going to be doing any audio reactivity today, just to keep it simple, but instead we're just going to be looking at creating a sphere or any shape that you would like. Before I dive in, I just want to say that I have been a little bit inactive lately. I'm sorry. Coming up with ideas for beginner-centric content that isn't just repetitive of itself is a little bit more difficult than I had anticipated. So if you guys have ideas for things you would like to learn in Touchdesigner, please always send through those suggestions. I try to read every comment and reply to the ones when I can. But yeah, send through any suggestions and ideas, and I will hopefully be pumping out some more content on the regular. Alright, so the first thing we're going to do today is look at just getting our instancing network set up. I'm going to keep this all here as reference, but you'll be able to see by any of these dotted lines if the networks are interfering. So the first thing we're going to do is I'm going to hide my background by pressing that blue button, and come down here and press tab, and go into our SOP operators here, which is mostly for 3D objects, and I'm going to get a sphere. You can really use any object you'd like here. I even had a text option here if you would like, but we won't necessarily do that. Next we're going to connect the sphere to a transform. This transform you might want to use later on to scale the object or to do some rotation, but for now we'll leave as is. Next thing you might want to do is a resample. This resample will simply just you'll be able to control the level of detail along with how it segments the polygon information that makes up the shape as well. So if you are using a object that has a lot of detail, it's going to sort of be able to shrink that detail down and spread it out evenly using this node. From this node, we want to connect this to a sort. We can actually leave this as no change for now, but the sort will essentially order the dots that make up this shape, so that way later on when we want to create a movement throughout the shape, we can change the direction of that movement by creating 0 to 1 along, say, the z-axis versus the x-axis. Yeah, I hope that makes sense. The next thing we want to do is convert it to our SOPs. So the way we do that is we can right click this output, go over to our chop tab, sorry I meant to say chop, do a SOP to chop, like so. And then out from here I'm going to connect in a null and leave some blank space. Now the reason why we had this blank space here is in case you want to do any information modification, such as we have the noise up here, but yeah, I'm going to actually not do that in this tutorial, but we'll leave that blank space like so. So before we do the photos, we'll go over creating the instancing network and what that is if you're not sure. So to do that, we're going to use a rectangle. A rectangle is going to be the shape that defines the little dots that make up the bigger shape. Essentially, instancing is taking a large object like this and spreading it at points equally across it, and then using what we're going to do here to define each of those smaller points, and then we'll texture them accordingly with the photos. So yeah, with this rectangle, we want to probably connect in a transform, again for good measure, in case we want to scale this down. I think we probably will want to scale this down, potentially to 0.01, like so, but we'll come back to that. Maybe even, no, we'll probably go a little bit larger, because we want to, rather than see particles, we want to see the individual photos. And then we can connect this to a null for good measure. Good practice in Touchdesigner usually to box end your network. See, I probably should have done it here. Box end it with a null, which just allows you to come in and quickly add in modifications between the two existing nodes if you do want to do that. From there, we're going to right click the null and go comp, and then grab a geometry like so, which will automatically take a input that we defined and create a network of it like here. Now we have this dotted line here going up because it's pointing to our render, but again, only if the dotted line's coming down does it really matter. In fact, we can even like get rid of that line by defining this to only render that geometry. We will need a camera for this setup, and then also a render top. And then I'm going to drag these on like so, but you won't need to do this if these are just your default or first ones like so. Connect out a null like that, and then click the blue dot like so. So what you can see now is that we have a little grey little square in the middle of the screen. That's because we haven't connected in any of the instancing information just yet. And what this is just doing is taking in a geometry input with no lighting and no texturing, and just has a grey cube just sitting there. So what we want to do now is we want to define our instancing, which we can do by going to the instance tab on the geometry and turning on instancing, and then dragging null, which may have a different number for you, onto the translate OP. And my Touchdesigner is slightly off. There we go. And then we can go translate XY and set that to be TX, and then TY and TZ. And there you can see we have a evenly distributed sphere with all the rectangles assigned to it. And now if we go back and look at what we had up here, when we compare the two, you can see the point of difference is, well, okay, the rectangles are a little bit bigger, so we can go down to our transform and, you know, make them a little bit bigger like so. But I'm just leave it there. We can adjust that later. But you can see it's essentially the same thing. So it's actually relatively simple to get an instancing network up and running. And when we do a lot of particle simulations or 3D point cloud renderings, this is also the process that we've been over probably many times before, if you've seen these tutorials. But now comes the secret sauce of creating a texture mapping algorithm of sorts to it. It's not too hard, but you will need a folder on your computer somewhere. It doesn't need to be relatively located to this actual file, but you will need to have a folder somewhere with just photos listed in it, and we'll create something that goes through all of those photos and maps them out automatically like so. If you download this project file from Patreon and the photos aren't working, this is why. You need to actually create your own folder of photos and assign them. Obviously, it'll be looking for photos based off of the input that I wrote here, which is just relevant to my computer. But yeah, okay, enough yapping. One thing, we'll add in two more things very quickly. One, we should make these rectangles white, just so we have a constant texture across them. So we can go to our materials and get a constant like so, and drag and drop like that, so that way they have even coloring. And then also, if you want, you can right click in between the render and the null, insert a transform, and go comp over background color, and then we have our background color here, which is red, green, blue, and then this last one here is alpha. So while you may think it's meant to be black right now, alpha is the sort of transparency level, so when it's 0 it's completely transparent, but if we make this 1 it'll turn to black. And in fact we could actually set this to be white and we will see the photos pop up once we actually add in the network. So I'm going to copy this stuff down because it is quite relevant, important to what we are doing. So the first thing we want to do is go to our DAT section, which I don't know if I've touched before much in tutorials. We're going to grab a folder like so, and it's going to default to I think this is just the folder that I'm currently in. So essentially what we want to do with this folder here is that we're setting the root folder to be the one where we have images. So rather than me going through my desktop, I'm going to just copy the one I already have set, like so, over here. But again, you can see the difference is that I've literally just clicked this plus and then browse to where the folder is. And make sure, again, you don't click on a file, but it's a folder with an open directory with no sort of backslashes at the end. The next thing we want to do is, I can drop this one now, is connect this to a select. This is essentially to get rid of the name, so we can select the rows by index, because we really just need to get the names. So we just want to get row index 1, start 1 to get rid of the 0, 0 here, which is like the assigning one, so we don't need that. This end row index will be set to automatically, so this number may be different based on the number of items you have in your folder. And then for the columns, we want to go select by name, and again we want to do the column name like so, like that, name, and yeah, that will only select the name column. Just gonna double check that was everything. That is indeed everything. Next thing, again for good measure, we want to connect in a null like so. Alright, now let's start off by doing by getting a movie file in. So actually there's two ways you can do this. You can, one, go to your folder and grab the first photo from that folder, and then drag and drop that into Touchdesigner like here, or you can get the movie file in and click the plus and navigate to the first photo in that folder, which again you can tell by the name here which one that is. Now I'm going, again, rather than pull up my desktop, just copy this node that I already created that has browsed to this node. So once we have gotten this movie file top, sorry, I was clearing my throat, we want to use add this little command to the end of it. So if I open up this here, you can see that I have the quotation marks, which is going to our folder, and then plus, and then this. So what we want essentially is folder path plus op null 5. Now, it might not be null 5. The null that we want to use is this null here. So it's, for me now, null 11. So I'm going to change that to null 11. And then square brackets, me.digits, position 0, which is just the first initial position. So what this will do is that it will pick the first image in the folder. So before you type in this command, you should see a particular image. And then once we type in, so you can copy the folder name from here if you like. You can type it in. Actually, I'll type it out for good measure, just so. So I copy and pasted that like so, then did plus null op single quotes null, and then whichever null this one is, so null 11, like so, and then square brackets to perform an operation, me.digits, and then comma position 0, so just the number 0. Sorry, I'm back. Figured out what I missed, which is very simple. At the end of the quotations here, we need to, since we're combining an operation, so we're being like This plus essentially is going to be like, hey, get the name of the image in the that's first, plus, and then append the path of the image. We actually need to add a slash after the folder name, so that way we're saying, hey, combine those two together. And now if I press enter, you can see that it loads correctly, and you should have a dotted line going between the two showing that these are connected. Cool. And the next thing we want to do is our replicator network. So essentially we want to repeat that process for every image we have in the folder, but we don't want to do that manually, because that would suck if you have like hundreds of images or even just like a little bit of images. So we're going to use this thing called a replicator. So our replicator lives in our comp and is a special little guy that sort of just does what you would expect. It replicates the operations on this movie file image. So we can define the template dat table with this folder, like so. Sorry, I think I meant to drag the null here. Sorry, we need to actually drag the null onto there. And then we want the master operator to be set to this movie file in like so. So drag that one in. And then let me just double check. Oh, I have an error because the item name is being used already. So I'm going to change this from item to photo, but this is just a, what do you call? This is a, arbitrary name, variable name. So it can be whatever you want it to be. You can see they spawn up here at 0, 0. So if you want to move those down, you can change this layout origin. This is XY coordinates. What I'm doing here is holding down middle mouse and then dragging down like so. And you can see here that it has replicated this operation for every photo that we have in this layout. I hope that makes sense. So again, we've dragged the null for the template here to go through, and then the master operator, which shows the command that we want to apply. You can set the max operations here. You can also click recreate all, and then change the origin of where all these things appear by using the layout origin like that, which is pretty epic. And now you can see all these dotted lines are pointing into our instancing. Like so. And yeah, you just got a little spoiler of what we're doing, but essentially what we want to do now is go back to our geometry and go to our second instancing tab, which gives us more control over our instances. In this case, we want to use instance textures. So when we click, do I need to move my Touchdesigner over? Oh no. So I've named this one photo. So if I type in, I'll just type it in. Type it in photo and then star for all. You can see that it has now applied all of these photos to be like so. And then we need to do this pattern here. So at this point we have our photos applying a texture mapping equally distributed to points like so, but we haven't really defined how to do that equal distribution across the sphere or even animate it like you saw in the intro, which is what we're going to do with this little pattern chop. So we can go to our chops and grab a pattern like so. Down the bottom, and then let's just copy the parameters I have over. So we can leave, let's do this one, bring the amplitude down to 0.19, and then everything else we need to magically set. The phase is just going to scroll through it, and that goes infinitely. So to set that up first, we can type in this command ABS and then capital T time .seconds, and then we want to make it a little bit slow, so we can times this by 0.1. So this is just going to be, well, you probably can't, it's probably too slow, but if I make this say times 10, you can't really visualize it, but essentially it's just scrolling for a phase, which is how we animate the pattern. The length is actually going to be the number of points, so we want to use the good old null. Where is this one? So the number, the sphere. So I didn't actually create a null, so bad practice on my behalf. Like I said, we can even do that now. We can actually right click from our sphere, create a null with our null 12, might be your null whatever, drag that on, so we just make sure we have those dotted lines going. In fact, I'm going to hide the background so everything's a little bit more visible. So we have the null dragging on like so. And then in our pattern, we want to, we can drag this null onto the length like so. And then we want to do .num for the number and then capital P points. So this is essentially being like, hey, look at this operation. The number of points is the number of links. So we have 823 dots, and that's how we're going to cycle through it. Next, we want to do number of rows, so the number of images we have. So we can get that from this null here. So we can drag this null on the to range. So we're going from 0 to 1, and we're changing that to 0 to however many .num rows we have. It is worth mentioning that in programming, we always count from 0. So we go 0, 1, 2, 3, 4. And what that means is we won't actually ever reach number 34 because we started from 0. So instead, we need to do -1 to cap it off at 1 below the maximum number. As you can see here, there are 33, like it counts to 33. But it starts at 0, so this says there's 34 rows because there are, but we actually end at number 33. And I think that is pretty much it. Common text index. Next thing we need to do is channel, so we can change this to photo index, for example. Photo index, like so. And yeah, I think the rest is good. So now if we go back to our geometry and we drag our pattern onto the text op like so, and then click the drop down photo index, you can see that we actually have evenly distributed photos across the whole thing. At least somewhat. And when I press play, you can see that it's scrolling through. And that is pretty much the whole tutorial. Now, there's a few different things to play around with. So let's just quickly, before we end off, have a look at what they were. If we go back to our sort, remember we said here we can change the direction. So if I change this to by Z, you can see it changes the direction of the animation. Additionally, here you can see this is moving quite fast. So maybe you want to change the pattern phase to be times 0.1, and they'll change in a much smoother way. Same with the amplitude. Play around with those settings. You might even want to change the type of wave depending on what you like. There's so many different things to try out. You can add a noise, you can play with the resampling, level of detail, etc, etc. And I think that's pretty much it. Again, the most complicated part of this tutorial is the replicator. So if there's any issues with that, I suggest looking up a tutorial specifically on the replicator and how it works. But again, essentially we want to make sure this table here with just the photo names is defined as the template. And then the master operator is the taking the command here, which is being like, hey, use this folder, but then make this the name and then cycle through them all, which results in this. And that's pretty much it. You should be able to use any shape you want instead of a sphere. You can use 3D point clouds. You could use 3D objects, text. But this project file with everything that it has going on here just clearing up some of the mess, is available for download in the link below, Patreon. Other than that, please let me know what you'd like to see and hear from me next, and I look forward to my next video. Peace.